Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Uterberg, and today I'm bringing you an interview with Luke Shelley, Jenna-Louise Hawkins, and Sophie Stacey, three of the creators of the short film, What We Wished We Could Be. Before I jump into the interview, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your podcast player so you can get all the newest episodes as soon as they are released. If you like the interview and want to hear more, please consider leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Luke Shelley is a BIFA long-listed director and writer whose previous films include the Royal Television Society winning Western Fear the Unknown Men and micro sci-fi Postponed. He uses short-form narrative to explore storytelling and test subversive methods. Jenna-Louise Hawkins is an award-winning screenwriter whose produced work has been screened at industry-leading film festivals, including Rhode Island International, Holly Shorts, Lady Filmmakers, and Raindance. She works as a script editor and script consultant and teaches screenwriting at Raindance Film School in London. Sophie Stacey is a BIFA long-listed deaf and neurodivergent producer with short-form experience in commercials, music videos, and social campaigns. Her work in the short film space now totals 15 produced projects, and she is a regular collaborator of the Academy Award-winning production company Slick Films. She is a returning guest on the podcast and joins me along with Luke and Jenna-Louise to talk about their short film collaboration, What We Wish We Could Be, which premiered at the 2024 Flickers Rhode Island International Film Festival. Luke, Jenna-Louise, and Stacey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. Hello, thanks for having us.
Now, your film tells the story about a couple, Aiden and Charlotte, at two very different stages in their lives as they deal with a serious illness. Tell me a little bit about what the inspiration for the story was.
Well, shall I field this one? The inspiration for the story actually comes from something that's quite personal to me in my life, in that my husband is one of the many victims of the contaminated blood scandal here in the UK. And that's had, far-reaching consequences but on his life, on his health, and also on my life and on our relationship. So the inspiration comes from that, and we were looking to share that story, or a relatable version of that story with a broader audience who might not have necessarily come across the contaminated blood scandal previously.
And just to jump in on Jenna's point, I was one of those people before meeting Jenna and before kind of learning about the contaminated blood scandal. When I read a version of this story that Jenna had previously written, it wasn't directly about the scandal, but it alluded to elements of that situation. And as the more I learned about it, the more the fire within me was sort of enraging that we needed to tell this story because so many people don't know about it. And I think the power of telling the story in this cinematic form, I think allows people to kind of get a better understanding of what it feels like on a human level, as opposed to watching maybe more news coverage or headlines that kind of depict it as data or statistics, which is something that we've sort of talked about before, about across this journey. So yeah, that was the kind of the fire behind us to really get this story made.
Yeah, and you mentioned that contaminated blood crisis, and obviously you have some statistics at the end of the film talking about how many untold thousands of people were affected by it, going back into the 70s and 80s. What is the hope? And to obviously, Jenny, you said it's kind of a personal thing for you, but what else are you hoping to share by putting a face to this issue now 40, 50 years later from when it first started?
I think you answer the question, you give the answer in your question. It's that putting a face onto the data. So when we see the blood scandal reported, it's usually done so with statistics and numbers. 3,000 deaths, for example, 30,000 infections. These are bewildering numbers, but it makes it very, very easy for people to switch off from it if that number doesn't necessarily represent them immediately. So by putting a face onto one of those numbers, we hope to bring it home really to people who are sitting in the audience who might not necessarily have thought twice about the blood scandal previously, but they look at our wonderful cast and the wonderful performances that they've given and identify with those characters and feel attachment to those characters and hopefully feel, as Luke described, feel the fire of concern and caring and compassion about people who are affected and infected by the blood scandal.
Yeah, and you mentioned the wonderful cast there. I thought Jamie Moscato, who plays Aiden, and is Anushka Lucas, who plays Charlotte. I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly. I thought they were both fantastic in their roles. How did you go about finding the right people for those roles? Was it casting them individually and then making sure they work together? How did, because obviously they need to be able to portray that relationship on the screen as well. So how did you go about that process of finding those two folks?
Yeah, it was an interesting process for us because Luke and Jen have been working on the script for quite a while, to the point of us casting. And when the script was optioned, it was in the January of 2023, and we knew that this was like an autumn winter film, so we knew that we were then going to have to wait until the end of 2023 to shoot it.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of time actually to start diving into who potentially could be these, who could be our Aiden, who could be our Charlotte. But we worked with a really wonderful casting director I've worked with before called Stevie Davis. He's incredible and so lovely to work with because the character of Aiden in particular was such a complex character to cast. So we did have a lot of back and forth, didn't we, Luke, in terms of who we should cast first. Should we
Yeah.
find our Aiden first? Should we find our Charlotte first? And we started to think, I think we started with who is our Charlotte.
Yeah. So I think the Charlotte character for us, we really wanted a certain type of kind of feeling for that character. So we wanted them to, they basically are the warmth to Aiden's kind of darkness, because obviously Aiden's living in a very, very insular, very kind of unrepresented world. And we wanted Charlotte to almost be the audience's viewpoint into that world. So we really wanted to find someone who could relay that brightness in this story. And I think also the fact that the character of Aiden was so difficult to cast, we kind of needed to kind of narrow the view by casting our Charlotte first. You could just sort of, we could then match whoever, we were going to cast as our Aiden with that person. So we managed to, we got together some options for Charlotte, Anushka being one of them. But we went down an alternate route, which is something that we've been open about on previous conversations, where we approached another actor with the part, and we were with the intention of going ahead and shooting film with them. But I think the universe is very strange in the way it operates, because I think that actually led us in a kind of strange direction, because obviously the person that we cast didn't end up doing the film. But what it did do, it did allow us to narrow our choices for Aiden. And I think once we had just at that time chosen our Charlotte, the options for Aiden became a lot clearer. And I think we all were in agreement when we saw Jamie Moscato on the list. And I have to be honest, I had no idea of his previous work. I hadn't come across him in my kind of life yet. So when I saw the work he had been doing, and I looked at his showreel and all the stuff he'd been doing, it came very clear and a very easy choice for me that he would be the perfect Aiden. So then we were moving forward with this, what we thought was a fully cast film. And then as the universe kind of presents challenges, the week before we're going to start shooting, our Charlotte could no longer do the project for various reasons. So we were stuck with this dilemma. So our wonderful casting director, Stevie Davis, he was so brilliant in these situations to be able to strike and go, okay, right, how do we change the scenario so it doesn't completely change the direction of this film in terms of being able to shoot the next week, but also not sacrifice the quality and the performances that we really needed. And obviously, as a director, the idea of doing anything this last minute is terrifying. But when he suggested Anushka Lucas, it was almost like a slap in the face on my part that I didn't kind of see that on the initial kind of casting round. And Anushka just seemed to just jump out of the screen on some of the sort of the assets that we had to watch of hers. And to be honest, through like sheer dumb luck, it kind of came together because those two, we had one day of rehearsal with them before we started shooting, which was on the Monday. And we took the blind leap, the leap of faith to put them in a room together and actually realize that they were absolutely perfect. Their chemistry was on point. there was they were familiar with each other's work. They were familiar with each other in, through mutual friends. So there's this kind of magic that was happening, and I think that the universe had guided it so that these two people met in this room, and then sort of became the Aiden and Charlotte that we now see in the film. So it's been a very interesting journey with the casting, but I'm so thrilled with what both Jamie and Anushka have brought to the film, because I think that they really do elevate what me and Jenna have worked on. And I think Jenna would agree that these kind of, we can't really see a world where these two actors didn't perform these characters.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. Absolutely.
And you're talking about Jamie with the show reel and stuff like that. There's obviously a very important bit of music kind of in the second half of the film that he has to perform. Was that musical moment always intended as part of the story, or was that something that kind of grew out of casting him, or the scripting, or the filming, any sort of along the way process?
It was certainly something that was in the script already. So that was something that was built into the structure of the story. So that was part of the casting process, which made it even more difficult to cast, because there was that element that he had to be able to sing as well as perform the character. But the idea of presenting the character of Aiden as a singer with this sort of hidden talent that he shares with nobody, I think came about through discussions me and Jenna had about the lack of voice that the community, those infected with, infected, contaminated blood, were dealing with. They had no, during the 40 years in which they had no sort of closure or justice for what had been done to them, there was no real way for them to communicate how they were feeling. And I think that the idea of expression through song it's the most powerful, I think, way of communicating that. And I think, Jen, what would you add? I think there was a moment in which that you felt that this could really kind of sell that emotion, but also the inner world in which Aiden sort of lives, and how that represents that sort of inability to express himself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me as the screenwriter, it was always twofold. The first one is, as Luke has explained, it was a metaphor for the voice of the character who, I think Luke is correct in saying that the community of the contaminated blood scandal didn't have a voice. I'd probably take it a step further and say they'd actually been sort of willfully denied a voice by the political position on the blood scandal, whereby they'd sort of been told that they'd been given the best possible treatment. And so that sort of gave people the feeling that, well, if I got the best possible treatment, then how can I express the loss about what's been taken from me? So that was definitely part of it. But then, as Luke says, the second part of it is that I thought a lot about Aiden as a character and how he has handled the difficulties in his life. And the conclusion I came to quite early in the writing process was that he was someone who was a bit dissociative, and that he was able to navigate the difficulties in life by retreating into his internal world, and his internal world being built of music sort of worked really well with the idea of that unexpressed voice. So that's why in the early scenes you see him, administering blood product, but at the same time singing to himself, and that sort of suggests that he's not entirely present
Right.
in the moment. And later in the story, Charlotte says to him, stay with me. Like she's quite frustrated with him, because when things get difficult, he retreats into his internal world and doesn't necessarily engage with the physical world around him.
I think it was also super important for us to not have Aiden defined by the fact that he's dealing with haemophilia and has been infected with contaminated blood. We wanted to see this couple, and we wanted to see what their hopes and dreams are, and that they are more than the medical condition. Because obviously, for everyone out there that is going through like long-term illness or anything similar to what Aiden and Charlotte are going through, they've got 10 other things that they're thinking about. They've got all their hopes, they've got all their dreams, and they're not defined by that one thing.
And I would just add to that as well, the film's called What We Wish We Could Be for a reason. And that is that the victims of the blood scandal have basically been deprived of living the lives that they might have hoped for and dreamt of.
Sure.
my husband, he was 16 or 17 years old when he was told he had this life-shortening illness, and the consequence of that was that he never felt that he could look ahead to the future. So he spent years and years living day to day. So
Sure.
he never planned for the future. He never let himself dream or feel aspiration or feel ambitious. And that was something that felt really important to me to convey through Aidan. He had this great singing potential, but he never really felt that he had the ability or the right.
Couldn't see that through to the ultimate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now you talk about the future there. Obviously, the film is kind of set in two different time periods. What were some of the challenges between setting up those so that they would be kind of visually far enough apart as to be different and recognizable as two different periods, but also not so far apart so that everything, or the characters themselves and everything around them were completely different?
Yeah, it is a complete balancing act to tell the story with a dual narrative. I think it's quite ambitious because I think, as you say, you've got to set up two different distinct kind of worlds and then pair them so they feel sort of in sync enough to make sense of the whole narrative, but feel different enough to sort of see the progression in their relationship. I think on a story level, the reason me and Jenna decided to tell the story with two narratives is to really kind of show the whole sort of scope of this couple's relationship in comparison to dealing with the contaminated blood scandal. The idea of being first told, early on in the relationship that if someone is infected and that there are a huge amount of risks at play in which they need to be told before they have to enter into that agreement together that they're going to have a relationship together because of those risks. And then secondly, once that relationship has progressed, it's then this sort of when the opportunity of treatment that may or may not help cure or suppress the hepatitis C in this case is offered, but that comes with its own risks and side effects. How do you communicate that with your partner, and what does that mean for the future from that moment on? So is those two conversations, those two big moments, actually parallel two conversations that Jenna told me about that she had with her husband Sean. They weren't as dramatic as they are depicted in the film, but they certainly were big life changing moments. And I think doing a dual timeline allows the audience to see both of those and see the similarities in those big choices, and saying yes or no to those moments from the perspective of Charlotte are life changing. And to go to the kind of more practical approach, I think we were very reliant on our wonderful production designer Bibi, because she had worked within the means of a short film budget. I mean, there was, things were tight. We were all kind of really pushing ourselves and had a huge ambition on this film. But I think what she was able to do was really inject a sort of, will really create a sort of a third character in the home, and that was something that that was so really important to us, because there's Aidan, there's Charlotte, and then there is their world, and their world is the home. So we really needed the production design and the design of all of the spaces in which they inhabit to reflect where they are in their lives. So like a lot of the sort of the timeline, which is what we would call the 2005 timeline, which is the timeline when they first meet. It's very bare. It's not very well loved. There's not a lot of character to those rooms in which Aidan has inhabited on his own for so long. And then when we jump forward to the 2008 timeline, there is a lot more warmth, there's a lot more color, and there's a lot more texture to all those places and spaces. It's, most notably the living room and the kitchen and the bedroom, where the color has been injected into those spaces that shows the progression, but it still feels like, the same home in which they both have kind of occupied. So I think there's a mixture of all those things, but I think having a great production designer really helps us differentiate between those spaces. And I think if we didn't have someone who could deliver on that, I think it would have been trickier to really separate those two timelines.
Yeah, and it also strikes me that the editing of the film, once you shot it, is also incredibly important in creating those two time periods. How did you keep track of that and figuring out where you wanted to make those cuts between the two, and make sure that both aspects, both timelines are contributing to pushing the story forward.
Yeah. Well, the script is written, excuse me, the script is written kind of scene by scene in almost in the order in which it is shown on screen. It would go, 2005 bedroom, and it would cut between the two timelines almost in the order in which it's seen on screen. With a couple of exceptions, I think when you get into the edit, things sometimes don't necessarily translate as well on screen as they do on the page. But really, I think with that mixed with the decision to shoot on 16mm film, we didn't have a lot of options to shoot different ways and coverage to help it cut together. We kind of had to plan the edit before we shot the film, so we kind of knew the order in which these shots would follow, and there would be a kind of pacing that was thought about beforehand. So when we got into the edit was in fact one of the fastest edits I've ever had in terms of this. We did it within 2 months, which is, if you ask anyone who works in short films, the editing process is normally the longest part because there's just so much time is dedicated to it. So
Sure.
yeah, I think that a lot of work on the front end really helped us, and obviously we had a wonderful editor in Flora Atkinson, who was so brilliant at kind of taking all of that prep and then kind of injecting her own pacing into it, and in revealing stuff that maybe we didn't see on the front end. So there was like a concoction of all these different things.
I think also Luke's been quite modest, so I felt like they need to jump in here because obviously Luke is a director, but he also is an editor. So I think in his prep, he approached it with both minds. So obviously shooting on 16mm has to be as lean as you possibly can, but everything was really thought about, well considered. Pretty much the end result matches what was storyboarded. There wasn't really a deviation. So Luke came into this with a really, really clear vision of what he wanted this film to be, and Flora in the edit helped to make that happen. But yeah, Luke sometimes can be a bit too modest. So yeah, there's a lot of preparation that went into this film.
Yeah, I would agree that Mr. Shelley's being modest there. The one thing that I would say just about the script and how this, because you asked about making sure that each scene moves the story forward. So, one of the things that is very clear in the script is that each scene has a turning point, which changes the direction of the story and the relationship. And by creating a sense that there was a relationship between the turning points in the 2005 timeline and also the 2008 timeline, as Luke had already mentioned, it created that sense that there's that general narrative thrust of the story overall, an overarching direction, so that it doesn't lag at any point and it doesn't feel that either of the storylines don't propel the main story.
Very good. Well, I have a couple of questions not specifically related to the film, but before I move on to those, is there anything else any of you want to touch on about what we wish we could be?
I guess I just wanted to, add to the whole point of this whole film and the reason in which we made it, raising awareness of the contaminated blood scandal and the educational element of that, but also that this is a film this is a film everyone can sort of tap into and relate to. I think it's a story about two people falling in love and dealing with very real couple dilemmas, and also just the idea of people who fall in love becoming carers to people. I think that's a very relatable thing. I think it's a subject matter that goes unheard of a lot of the time. So I really hope that people who watch this, who might be dealing with similar situations in that area, can see a bit of themselves in this film. So that's my overall hope that this film can portray. And yeah, I think as a team, I think we're all incredibly proud of the film, and thank you for giving us this platform to talk about it, because I think it's really important to have these discussions and to really kind of inform all of the rationale and the reasonings behind the decisions that we've made on the actual film itself.
Wonderful. Now, this might be the hardest question I ask, but if you had to pick your top 3 films of all time, what would they be?
I'm not going to pretend that we haven't had this discussion where we, try and figure out what these films could be. But I'll kick things off, but I hope you don't mind. I'm going to tailor them specifically to, or some of them at least. I'm going to pick 2 films that have a similar kind of relation to our film, because then that's a good way
Sure.
to kind of link it in. So, Marriage Story by Noel Baumbach is a wonderful film that I really loved when it came out, and was actually a touching point for What We Wished. And I'm sure you can see parallels there, especially with a couple dealing with a very difficult time. Because it's Christmas as well, I really love The Apartment. It's a Christmas film that people don't often talk about that often. Billy Wilder, brilliant. And it's also about a couple, not so much a very early days couple. It's similar to the 2005 timeline. So a couple that are sort of falling in love and figuring it all out, and there is darkness and there is humor and there is beautiful cinematography. So that would be another one. And just one for me, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is the film that I would go back to. It's my comfort film. I watch it at least once a year. And it's probably one of the films that kind of propelled me into wanting to make movies in the first place.
Excellent. Good choices. Who's next?
Don't be shy, guys. Go on, jump in.
Yeah, I really wanted to know what Jenna's films are, because we have bets going on as to what they're going to be, basically.
Put us out of our misery, Jenna.
Please.
I'm glad that you've got a bet going, because I've also got a bet going, because I'm definitely giving 2 of the spots to one to Midnight Cowboy and the other to Black Swan. But the third one I've been mulling over all day, and I've been trying to decide between The Exorcist and Mulholland Drive. But actually, I'm going to go for one of my comfort films, and probably it's been my favourite film for the longest period of time, because I fell in love with it when I think I was about 5, and that's Watership Down.
Ah, lovely film. All right, who won the bet?
I think I got two right there.
2 or 3. I think we both got 2 or 3. We
Watership
both got
Down.
Midnight Cowboy. We both got Watership Down. It was
Yeah.
actually Black Swan that threw us off.
Very good. All right, Sophie, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously last time I was on, I went down this thriller route, but I sort of had to think about what films I really love watching. But then they also ended up being ones that have like this, I don't know, almost political justice element anyway. So it kind of links to this this film as well. So I went with The Untouchables, Erin Brockovich, and it's a bit of a rogue choice, but it's my all-time favorite, which is Hot Fuzz. Edgar Wright, yeah, it's my all-time favorite. But they all kind of have a weird justice link into them.
Yeah, for sure. Some good selections all around, definitely. Now, if you could invite any 3 movie characters to your next dinner party, who would they be and why?
Okay, this is one we've again. I hope we're not breaking your rules. Can we choose one each? As there's 3 of us, can we choose one each and assemble
Yeah, that's fine.
this dinner party for the ages?
Go for it.
I'm gonna go with my comfort film, but be a little bit more left field. I'm gonna go for Henry Jones Sr., portrayed by the legend that is Sean Connery. Just because the breadth of knowledge that he has on history and the life he spent in archaeology, brilliant. And I think a brilliant dinner party guest.
That's a good choice. I feel like that's going to be completely lost on my choice. All that wisdom, because I've gone for Danny Butterman from Hot Fuzz, Nick Frost's character. So that's going to be quite an interesting conversation.
Very good. And Jenna, who would you add to that mix?
Well, I'm going to bring Pippin from Lord of the Rings to the dinner party, because Pippin and I share a passion, and that is second breakfast. So I'm hoping that this dinner party can be sort of around 10 a.m. so we can enjoy some second breakfast.
Nice.
Excellent. I like that choice as well. And do you have any books you could recommend that you've read recently? They could be fiction or nonfiction and don't necessarily have to be related to movies.
Yeah, I mean, I think I might be speaking for all 3 of us when I say that Mark Ward has just had a book published called Bleeding Fabulous. Mark is one of their campaigners for the Contaminated Blood campaign, and his book is, I've only just started it, but it is extraordinary. So I definitely recommend that.
And I think it feels only right to just name a couple more sources for people, sort of touchstone sources for the scandal, because it is so underrepresented. So I'm gonna go for Caroline Wheeler's Death in the Blood, because I feel like that one is something I'd read in preparation for making the film. It exposes many of the horrific events that happened over the course of the 1970s, 1980s, and beyond. It doesn't tell everyone's story, but it tells a select few stories, and I think it's a good one for people to sort of be as an introduction to what's been going on for 40 years.
Jamie read that one as well, didn't he, as he was preparing for the role?
Yeah, Jamie did read that as well. Yeah.
I mean, mine's slightly different, but mine's more of like got a political element to it, but it's quite out there. But I've just started rereading Penguin Classics, which is Cicero selected works. So it's been translated, and obviously Cicero was considered one of the greatest orators of Rome. But just being able to read his letters and have a first-hand account of the events leading up to the Roman Republic turning into an empire, but also his complex relationship with Julius Caesar, I think you can read it in any time and just compare, I think, to different political events going on in the world. So I think that, for me, that's a good recommendation for anyone wanting to, I guess, get an eyewitness account of those kind of things. But yeah, more of a political thing, and I guess you have to be interested in maybe a bit of ancient Rome as well.
Sounds good. Who else from the film and movie industry should I have on the podcast?
That is a real tricky one. It's just like ever, like who would be the best conversation to have?
Who should I bring on next? Who should if I can get him? Who should I bring on next?
I mean,
I've got two.
Oh, go on,
I mean,
go on,
where you
Luke.
go? No,
go on.
I'm gonna go super crazy, and then one that I
Okay.
feel like would be actually be really, really good. So my super crazy one is Harrison Ford. I mean, I really hope that you can bring him on. I really want to have him on. I'd love that. But also, I'd like to give a shout out to Chris Overton, who is our exec producer. He is responsible for so many of the UK short films, that are being made at the moment. He's the CEO and owner of Slick Films, which is our production company, and he is an Oscar winner himself. He won the Oscar for Best Live Action Short Film in 2017, I believe, for The Silent Child. So I think he is a great one to have, and I think he has a lot of wisdom in general about the art of making short films.
Good. Yeah, I was going to say Chris would be a good one. I think also maybe for me, there's like breakthrough director Luna Carmoon, who's from London, who she directed Horde, which came out this year. But I think she's got a real eye, but also she talks very openly about neurodivergence as well, which I think is a whole other beast of a thing to deal with in this crazy industry, especially from a creative perspective, but also having to stick to timelines and, the filmmaking gods with the money, I guess. So I think, yeah, I would recommend her.
Jenna, anyone you recommend to have on?
Well, I was going to say Chris Overton as well, so I might have to come back to you on it.
No worries. Well, last thing before we wrap up here, do you have any other projects lined up that you're working on? And also, where can people follow you on social to keep tabs on what you're up to?
Yes, so me and Jenna are currently working. Well, me and Jenna. Apologies, Sophie. We are all three of us are working on a feature film unrelated to the blood scandal. However, there are fires burning in that corner, but we won't touch on those. But also we're directly working on a feature film called 100 Mile House, which is a very kind of sinister Western thriller set in Canada about a serial killer operating at the time. That's all I'll say. I won't tease too much, but that's all I'll say. So we're working on that at the moment. Very much a genre piece. In terms of socials, you can follow the film at What We Wish Film on Instagram. We're also on Facebook if you're on there as well, just by the name of the film. And my personal account is at DIR Luke Shelley. So that's like the start director Luke Shelley. So you can find me there.
Yes, as Luke teased, we are working on the Canadian Western epic at the moment. But mostly that is Luke and Jenna's hard work. I just sort of dip into it now and again. But apart from that, a couple of kind of other features in early development, as well as, I think since we shot What We Wished, I did have shot like another 3 short films. So those are in their final stages and also about to hit the circuit, as well as What We Wished actually being really early on its festival journey, but doing really well, very successful. So we're going to keep pushing that and hopefully have a great 2025 with it. But yes, you can follow the film on Instagram, and then you can also find me. It's Sophie LST. On Instagram.
And I have another film at the same stage of the festival journey as What We Wish, and that's called The Friend. In addition to 100 Mile House, as teased by Luke and Sophie. I've got 2 other feature films in early development, and also up my sleeve a long form version of What We Wish We Could Be, should an appropriate opportunity present itself for such a project. Oh, and on socials, you can find me on Jenna-Louise Hawkins. That's Jenna and then Lou, Lou Hawkins on Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like you are all plenty busy these days, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you in the future. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk a bit about the film, for sharing your film with me. It's been really interesting hearing about it, and look forward to seeing what's next from all of you.
Thank you so much for having us, Jonathan. It is a real pleasure to chat to you, and we love what you're doing, and all the brilliant conversations you've had so far, and hopefully there's loads more to come.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you again to my guests today, Luke Shelley, Jenna-Louise Hawkins, and Sophie Stacey. Their short film, What We Wish We Could Be, is currently making the festival rounds, so be sure to check it out at a festival near you. The Oscar Project podcast is written and produced by me, Jonathan Eichelberg, with editing assistance from Joshua Eichelberg. If you want more movie coverage, check out The Oscar Project online at theoscarproject.substack.com, and be sure to come back for my next episode where I will be discussing the 1928 film, The Last Command. Until then, I hope to see you at the movies.